Welcome into another episode of Home Field Advantage. Hope you're all having a great weekend wherever you may be listening to us across our great country or our great land. My name is Will Highland. Saturday night here, ahead of AFC Championship game, NFC Championship game, Sunday, also known as Championship Sunday, also known as what used to be the Brady Bowl, which is now the Mahomes Bowl. All right, so we have a situation occurring where I have not talked a lot about the NFL playoffs. We did our preview show 2 weeks ago with Diesel and Cam, and then we had wildcard weekend, we had divisional weekend. I did a quick live vid in the background um, on whatever day that was. Oh, I don't have my calendar behind me. That's okay. Well, whatever day that was, we went ahead and did that. I think it was Tuesday. I did a live video. But um, by and large, I uh, I haven't talked a lot about the NFL playoffs, which is unlike me, considering this time of year I'm usually focused heavily on that. So we'll talk about that to close the show to make sure we tie up any loose ends there. But where I wanted to begin is with the Baseball Hall of Fame results. So Tuesday night, the Baseball Hall of Fame released their voting, and it was Ichiro Suzuki, uh, Billy Wagner, and wow, I'm forgetting the third person already. This is great, great show. Um, and CC Sabathia, yes, of course, who made the who made the cut. So deserving players for the most part. I think Billy Wagner had been trying to get in for a while, um, and had continued to, you know, ease up his vote totals over time, and then he eclipsed the 75% threshold that you need in order to be elected. So good for Billy Wagner. CC Sabathia, I have a little bit of a problem with. I can't remember what I said because I think when the ballot came out back in November, again, here we are following the usual timeline of Baseball Hall of Fame discussion, which is ballot comes out in November, everyone gives their thoughts on the ballot. Results come out in January, everybody complains about the results, rinse and repeat. I can't remember what I said about CC Sabathia in November, and I didn't go back and look. Um, but I do remember what I said back then when it comes to it's about your gut reaction, and then if your gut reaction is yes or no, uh, you stick with it. If it's maybe, then you look into stats and then make your decision. I like CC Sabathia. He seems like a good guy. Had a long career, which I think helped his numbers. He pitched a very long time for the Yankees, most notably, as well as the Cleveland Indians at the time and the Milwaukee Brewers. So I don't have any issues with CC Sabathia, having a very good career. Now, is his career Hall of Fame worthy? Um, there's a lot of pitchers that had better numbers than him that aren't in the Hall of Fame, um, or aren't in yet. But I mean, Kurt Schilling, love him or hate him, has had a better career than CC Sabathia, in my opinion. I don't think he won a Cy Young like Sabathia did, but he won more World Series, pitched better in the postseason, and in most every category that's not determinant of longevity, he had a shorter career than Sabathia. He did better in those categories. ERA, ERA plus, things like that. Um, so look, I mean, I think Sabathia gets in the Hall of Fame because he was a Yankee and because he had a very long career and he had a lot of innings pitched by the end of his career. And, I think those are all things that are taken into consideration with Sabathia. Now, the rest of the group, Ichiro, very deserving. Um, and talk about Billy Wagner, talk about Sabathia. Ichiro is a very deserving player. Had a ton of hits in his career. The interesting thing, though, about Suzuki or Ichiro, um, as he's more commonly referred to, I looked at his statistics up against Kenny Lofton because it had been shared on X, and I wanted to see, what that was all about. So I looked up and did further digging. Um, Suzuki played in almost 2,700 games and had over 10,000 plate appearances, almost almost 11,000. And he had 3,000 hits. That was again an incredible career, and a lot of that was due to longevity. He had a 311 career batting average and a 107 OPS plus. Career on base of 355. I mean, he had incredible numbers. Um, the interesting thing is Kenny Lofton uh, also had a really good career, and he's not in the Hall of Fame. He had a better WAR than Ichiro, more home runs, one more RBI, and over 100 more steals. He had a worse batting average, but it was 299 compared to 311. Not too far off. He had a better career OBP, a better career slugging percentage, and a better career OPS and the same OPS plus. But he played in 500 less games. And so I think what happens, guys like guys like Wagner, Ichiro, Sabathia, is they get rewarded because of longevity. And I think that's a very important component in the Baseball Hall of Fame. But I think sometimes it leads you to miss the forest for the trees. For a lot of people, Ichiro should have been a unanimous Hall of Famer, and I agree. But Kenny Lofton fell off the ballot with similar numbers. Why is that? Because people associate Ichiro's career with longevity and consistency. And I think that helps, obviously, when you're talking about who deserves to go to the Hall of Fame. It's the reason why Max Scherzer is going to go to the Hall of Fame. Max Scherzer was a late bloomer. His stats his Hall of Fame stats are almost entirely in the back half of his career. It's the reason why Craig Kimbrell's not going to go to the Hall of Fame. If you looked at Craig Kimbrell's statistics for the first, 6 or 7 years of his career, he was on pace to pass Mariano Rivera, the only unanimous player ever to make it to the Hall. He was going to be better than Dennis Eckersley or Trevor Hoffman or any other great closer. But the second half of his career is terrible, has been terrible, plagued by injuries, bouncing around from team to team, and I don't think he ever really recovered from the situation he dealt with at the end of his tenure in Boston, in the lack of spring training that he had. So, like, there was a there was a time where Chris Sale looked like a surefire Hall of Famer, but the second half of his career has been plagued by injuries. And so longevity matters more than a short-term burst of success, which is why somebody like Dustin Pedroia didn't get that many votes. I love Pedroia, and I said this when the ballot came out. He didn't have a long enough career by Hall of Fame standards. Like the reason why Craig Biggio made it to the Hall of Fame is because I think he had 3,000 hits. Why did he have 3,000 hits? Because he played forever. So that's Ichiro benefits from that. Not, he was going to get in regardless, but the reason why he's unanimous is because everyone except for one voter apparently associates his career with extreme longevity and superb consistency. It's the reason why CC Sabathia gets in. You know, um, so make of it what you want. The Hall of Fame is always going to be something that baseball fans argue about. I've been saying this for years. But it's an important part of the game's history to be able to talk about this stuff and be candid about it. Right? Like Carlos Beltran didn't get in the Hall of Fame because he was part of the Astros cheating scandal. Andrew Jones didn't get in the Hall of Fame because he had a domestic, situation. These things matter to people. Curt Schilling's not in the Hall of Fame because he said some, pretty uh, inflammatory things over the course of his career or post-career. At one point, believe it or not, he was employed by ESPN, right? All he had to do was not talk. He was going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, in my opinion. But, he had some issues with that. And so these things matter to people when they're voting about the Hall of Fame. But the other thing that matters outside the character stuff, which is what everyone focuses on, it's longevity. I look at the rest of this list, and this will be my last point on this. The rest of this list, David Wright looked like a Hall of Famer. Second year on the ballot, only got 8% of the vote. Probably that was a lot of Mets writers, right? Why did he not get into the Hall of Fame? Well, it's because he got injured too much. Same thing with I thought Felix Hernandez was going to be in the Hall. I remember saying that back in November. He only got 20% of the vote. Why? Because he pitched in Seattle. And people say this shouldn't matter, but it matters. If you play on the West Coast, except if you're Mike Trout, but even Mike Trout has struggled with this, you don't get the same kind of exposure and appreciation that you do if you play on the East Coast. Because baseball, whether people want to admit it or not, is a regional sport, right? ESPN carries what, 2 or 3 national games a week? Fox carries 1 or 2. That's 5 national games a week. The rest of those are buried on your local streaming service or cable network. So you don't have the opportunity to watch Felix Hernandez deal all year long. And people, I've been told by really smart baseball people that shouldn't matter in the age of social media. Unfortunately, it does. It still matters. Television still matters to baseball. And when there's 162 games a year, you got to get people to tune in order to see situations like that. And unfortunately, that's why guys like Felix Hernandez are going to struggle. Now, you could say, well, it didn't inhibit Ichiro, and Ichiro played in Seattle. That's true, but Ichiro, being a Japanese player, had a lot of exposure in that regard nationwide. So, and the same way Shohei Ohtani does. And so that helps. And all 3 of those guys that I just mentioned played on the West Coast. Other notable things, Alex Rodriguez, 37% of the vote. 4th year on the ballot. I believe he's going to continue to stay on. Probably for at least another year. I think you get 10 years on unless you drop below 5%. I think. Somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. But, A-Rod's going to stay on the list. Chase Utley, in his second year, getting 40% of the vote. That's interesting to me. But yeah, some of these guys that didn't get that many votes. Mark Burley only getting 11%. Wild, 5th year on the ballot. That's confusing to me. I think he had a great career. Yeah, some of these other guys that dropped off. Ben Zobrist, Fernando Rodney, Hanley Ramirez, Carlos Gonzalez, Adam Jones, Curtis Granderson, Troy Tulowitzki, Brian McCann, Russell Martin, and Ian Kinsler. Yeah, I think those are all non-Hall of Famers. So, all right, we've covered that. That's our annual baseball Hall of Fame discussion. But there's a lot of emotional ties to that, I think, in the sports world. All right, other emotional things going on. The trade deadline in the NHL is starting to get interesting, especially after Friday night's trade involving the Hurricanes and the Avalanche. So there are a lot of people who get really cranked up about the NBA and NHL trade deadline because it almost always falls after the Super Bowl, but before the NFL draft, of course, where there's no NFL to talk about, and baseball is only in spring training, and we're well past the Hall of Fame discussion. So those 2 things draw a lot of conversation in the months of February and late January. but especially post Super Bowl. Here's where I am at with the NHL trade deadline. Okay. This is something that I've harped on for a while with the Bruins, and I'll get to them in a minute. But first I want to talk about the Avalanche and their Hurricanes because they're doing the same thing, right? Forever, conventional wisdom has been in sports, but especially in the NHL. If you're not good or you've got a lot of expiring free agents, then you got to deal them and get something for them, and you got to get draft picks and you got to start a rebuild. Um, no, I disagree. If you're a team like Carolina or Colorado, then you have a opportunity to win, and you have to make the most of those opportunities. Wingers are hard to come by in the National Hockey League, especially right shot wingers. And when you get an elite one, you lock them up. But the other things that are hard to come by in the National Hockey League are top line defenders who can score and top line centers who can win faceoffs and score and play a 200-foot game. The Colorado Avalanche had Mikko Rantanen as their top right wing. They had Nathan MacKinnon and they had Cale Makar. Nathan MacKinnon is an MVP caliber player. So is Mikko Rantanen. So is Cale Makar. In fact, Cale Makar in 2022 won the Conn Smythe and the Norris. The only other players to do that in NHL history, I believe, are Bobby Orr, and I'm forgetting the second one, of course. Bobby Orr. Oh man, I can't. All right, I tried to go there with stats, and the name just literally left my brain. I digress. There's only been two people that have done that before Cale Makar. So the Colorado Avalanche are sitting pretty. Issue is they've paid MacKinnon. They need to pay Cale Makar soon. And Mikko Rantanen's on an expiring deal. But they also know that they're still a very good team that could win championships. On the other side of the country is another team in a similar situation. Marty Necas had one extra year of term left. Not the player that Rantanen is, but still a very good player in the league. But they also had kind of an uphill battle in the playoffs. Despite being a very good team that has competed at the top of the Eastern Conference for several years now, they haven't won the big one. They've got a great coach, but they're in a division that's very hard. They're in a division where they're probably going to go on the road and play the Devils or the Capitals in the first round of the playoffs. And then if they won that, they were probably going to end up playing the Leafs or the Panthers. Assuming the higher seeds win. That's an uphill climb. And they've also haven't had the kind of goaltending you want out of a team that's hoping to win a Stanley Cup. So the Colorado Avalanche found a dance partner in trying to trade Mikko Rantanen because they can't pay Mikko Rantanen what he's going to need to be paid. He's going to need to be paid north of 12 million a year, probably 13 or 14. They weren't going to be able to do that if they wanted to pay Cale Makar because in the NHL, it's a hard cap. And so they found a dance partner. They found a team like them that had pieces that they needed to move, cap space they needed to create, players they might not be able to sign, but both needed to win, and that's what happened. Now, the issue is they also needed somebody else to come in and play the banker, and that's where the Chicago Blackhawks came in. Chicago Blackhawks said, hey, we'll throw in Taylor Hall, which, quick aside, Taylor Hall, insane career. Drafted number 1 overall in 2010, played the early part of his career with the Oilers, went to the New Jersey Devils, I believe, via trade, and then won a Hart Trophy in his own right with the Devils, then ended up on the Coyotes, was it perhaps in free agency or another trade, then ended up on the Sabres, I believe, in free agency, only to then get dealt from the Sabres to the Bruins, fit in well, sign a great contract with the Bruins, then get traded because the Bruins were in cap jail to the Chicago Blackhawks, where he then missed an entire season with an ACL injury. Then he comes back, has a decent year on a bad team, and the Blackhawks needing to get something for Taylor Hall, who's finally on an expiring deal of his own, dealt him as part of this trade, took on the money from Rantanen so that the Hurricanes could make it fit cap wise, and Chicago got a third round pick. Insane stuff. So it goes to show you that when you got to strike while the iron's hot, all right, in the NHL. The Avalanche, if they had stood pat, would have been very easy. You know, they're missing players. They're missing Labushkin. They're missing Gabriel Landeskog for like the third straight year. And it could have been very easy for them to say, look, we need to win. We're going to keep Rantanen if we're going to try and sign him. If we can't sign him to a team-friendly deal in the offseason, whatever, at least we put in our best effort. They said no. They said, look, we want to win, and we also want to be smart at the same time. And we'll go trade for Marty Necas, who's a pretty good player. And I think they got Chris Drury as well, solid player. They're saying we can make a hockey trade for Mikko Rantanen. We don't have to deal him for picks, right? This is conventional wisdom in the NHL. This is why the Chicago Blackhawks are where they are. They think draft picks are going to solve them. Well, yeah, they got Bedard because they won the lottery barely. But you have to sometimes make hockey trades, make tough decisions with players on your rosters and not just picks. And that's what Carolina and Colorado did. They said, look, we got to make some tough decisions. Carolina said, look, we have in front of us a hard road if we want to go where we want to go. And in order to do that, we got to go out and we got to be fearless. And that's where, you get Mikko Rantanen on your team, who's one of the best players in the West this year. So good for those two teams. Now, as it pertains to the Bruins, there's still some names out there. Issue is the Bruins don't have the, bullets in the chamber to make any of these moves. I don't want them to deal their first round pick, but at the same time, if they deal their first round pick for a good player and they can get him to re-sign like they do with Hampus Lindholm, then I'm fine with it. Okay, because one of the issues I have with the Bruins fans, my fellow brethren, is they want to live in two worlds at the same time. I also think it's a mistake to want to blow up the team or want to sell out on a team right now that's not that great. They're okay, but I think Bruins fans want to live in this world where they want to rebuild, but then they don't believe that their team can draft. It's the same thing we deal with the Patriots all the time. Well, we need to draft really well. We need our first round pick to be awesome. Well, okay, are we firing Don Sweeney? Yeah, let's fire him. All right, then who's making your first round draft pick? Do you believe in this person to make this pick? You fire Don Sweeney. You get your first round pick. Who are, because Don Sweeney's first draft, as we all remember, he had 3 consecutive first round picks and they whiffed on all of them. I mean, they didn't really whiff on DeBrusk, but DeBrusk was, a middle 6 player when he should be a top line player if he's drafted 15 overall. So the Bruins fans want to live in this world where we can't, we need our picks. We need to build for the future. We need to restock the cupboard. All right, well then let's trade Charlie Coyle and Trent Frederick. No, 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 no. We don't want to do that. Okay, well then let's trade our first round pick for a player that we can re-sign. Oh no, 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 no. We don't want to do that. We want to keep our first round pick. Well, I'm old enough to remember when we wanted that, then we traded Linus Ullmark for a first round pick that everybody liked on draft night. Dean Letourneau, everyone said, yeah, he's a really raw player, but he's gonna be really good if he can figure it out. Well, 8 months into his life as a Bruins prospect, these same fans are already ready to give up on Dean Letourneau. So, what do you want to do? Do you want to draft a player and restock your farm system, or do you like Red Sox style, or do you want to use that first round pick in a hard cap league to go get a player that you might be able to re-sign? If that player is JT Miller, would you have would you rather have JT Miller or someone from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, who's 17 years old, who might not play until the 30s? That's a good question. I would rather have JT Miller. Okay, that's where I'm at with the Bruins and the trade deadline. What I'd like them to do is trade Trent Frederick. I like Trent Frederick, but if Trent Frederick isn't going to sign here, you can make a hockey trade with Trent Frederick. In fact, even if you trade Trent Frederick, but don't get a hockey player back and instead get one of these picks that we've been talking about, you might be able to withstand that because then you could finally call up somebody like Fabian Lysell or Georgi Merkulov to play every day. And then we can figure out if those players are any good. Because one of my issues right now is, we finally got Matt Potter up. People are saying, "Oh, we need to call up the kids, call up the kids." All right. In order for that to happen, you need to deal some guys because there's way too many guys on the bottom six on this team. Now, Morgan Geekie has somehow found, his inner Jerome McGinley the last, 2 months and has played a really solid top line left wing. I think he's got 14 goals in 28 games. It's a goal every other game or something like that. Or maybe it's something like that. He's like basically getting like averaging you a goal every other game at least. I'm not a mathematician. Um, but you're getting Morgan Geekie playing over his weight. But Charlie Coyle and Trent Frederick and Justin Brazeau and Oliver Wahlstrom and Mark Kaslick is hurt. And suddenly you look around this roster, you've got Cole Kepke and Max Jones and Vinny Lettieri, and you've got a lot of guys who are just guys. But you have Georgi Merkulov and Fabian Lysell, who you, again, thought highly of when you drafted them, who haven't quite met the mustard because we haven't seen them play. So you kind of got to figure out what you want out of this team. If you want them to sell, 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 then yeah, you got to go call the Minnesota Wild for Charlie Coyle. Or you got to go call the LA Kings for Trent Frederick. Or you got to go call somebody where, either someone that's going to be good enough for Coyle to waive his no trade clause and take money, retain more money for his next year plus, or you go trade Trent Frederick and hope that you get maybe a pick back, and then you can call up somebody else. That's what the Bruins need to be doing because, again, I've said this to Kyle on Odd Man Rush. The Bruins are in the midst of the playoffs right now. They don't need to dive off the deep end. Now, if they've got some hard games, they've got Winnipeg, they've got Minnesota coming up, those matter. But I just want everyone to understand this team is very much still in the mix. So you don't want to blow it up. If you're gonna trade, I would trade Frederick, and if you can get the right piece back for Coyle, I'd think about trading Coyle. And then the rest of the guys, you could waive Wahlstrom. I like Wahlstrom, he's from Maine, but like you could waive some of these guys if you want Fabian Lysell and Georgi Merkulov and other players to play, even if it's Ryan Mast or Riley Duran or anyone else who's in Providence who's having a decent season. If you want to get these guys NHL experience and you want to sell, then sure, but just be honest about it. Just be honest about what you want to achieve back. If you want draft picks back, are these draft picks who's making this draft pick? Because if you want to fire Sweeney, I and you don't, and I don't know who's making this draft pick, I'm not sure I want to sell good players for draft picks. You know, we give Don Sweeney a lot of crap, but he did also draft McAvoy, you know, and Swayman and some cornerstones of this team. All right. My last point about the Bruins. They are, as I just alluded to, they are in the mix here. They have a potential to make up some hay in this wild card race. And the reason I say that is between now and March 1st, they leave New England twice. All right. In the next month plus, They have a game at Madison Square Garden, and then they have a game next week with the Buffalo Sabres. So other than like Montreal, maybe Ottawa and New York Islanders, those are like the closest away games you could have. You're going to Buffalo, so I guess it's almost as close, almost as close as Toronto too. But you understand what I'm saying. You're going to Buffalo and you're going to New York City. The Bruins right now are hurting. McAvoy and Lindholm hurt, literally. They're hurting. Kaslik, who I just mentioned, is on IR. They need to get healthy if they're going to go for this. If they're going to be buyers at the deadline or make hockey trades at the deadline, they need to be healthy. And they've got the Four Nations break and a bye mixed in, and they've got a lot of home games. In fact, March 1st, they play the Penguins in Pittsburgh. So you're only going to Pittsburgh. It's not until March 2nd on a Sunday that you leave the Eastern time zone or leave the Northeast when you go to Minnesota. So the Bruins are going to have an opportunity. Sure, some of these other teams are finally going to get their games on hand on Boston, but the Bruins are going to have an opportunity to get rested, stay close to home, and get healthy. And that's important. All I've heard since about Thanksgiving has been how many games in hand all these teams have on the Bruins. Well, great. Ottawa has games in hand on the Bruins. Well, in the last week, the Bruins have gotten 3 out of 4 possible points against the Senators. When there's 9 teams competing for 2 spots, games in hand don't actually matter because everyone's playing everyone. So, like, if the Senators have 2 games in hand on the Bruins, but they're playing the Penguins or the Blue Jackets or the Flyers or the Rangers or something, and the Rangers are also losing, then the Bruins benefit by default. It will whittle away at the amount of teams that are chasing them or that they're chasing. And at the same time, let all these teams play a bunch of back-to-backs. Let them have it. Sure, the Bruins can get rested, get McAvoy and Lindholm back, then see where the season takes them from there. All right, last thing. It's been the last 5-10 minutes talking about the NFL situation. So we got championship game Sunday. If you're listening to this after the fact, then you know what happens already. There's going to be plenty of time to talk about the Chiefs and the refereeing or the dynasty, legacy and all this stuff that I'm describing. If they win, we're going to have 2 weeks to talk about what happens if the Chiefs three-peat, where do they rank all time, all that stuff. We're going to have 2 weeks to talk about that. And then if they win, we're going to have years to talk about it. So I'm not going to take the last 10 minutes of a show on some random Saturday in January and go down that rabbit hole. Similarly, I'm not going to talk to you about, Jaden Daniels and, what the blueprint is for the Patriots to follow in the Commanders' footsteps if they want to, do a quick rebuild. We're going to have the offseason to talk about that. What I want to tell you is this. From a fan base perspective, okay, if you're a Patriots fan, we can go to bed, we can dream about the good old days, we can see, this is the great time of year because, every other day um, you're coming up with a anniversary of some kind. Like when you're a Patriots fan, you grew up with a lot of playoff runs, you see an anniversary, 7 years since this, 10 years since this, 15 years since this. So we have all that to look back on. But the truth of the matter is there's football to be played this weekend. And if you're a Pats fan and you're wondering who to root for, I've got some bad news for you. You got to root for the Buffalo Bills. You also have to root for the Washington Commanders. Now, Washington, I don't think there's any skin off our nose with Commanders fans. In fact, I'm going to tell you this right here to end the show. Here's my thesis. Patriot fans have a lot more in common with Bills fans and Commanders fans than a lot of people will realize. What do I mean by that? Well, let's start with the Bills. Do you think people in upstate New York like New York City? Do you think Bills fans like the Jets? No. Do you think Bills fans like the Giants? No. Neither do Patriot fans. Most Bills fans Might even like the Red Sox or the Celtics if they live in, the upstate, Adirondack region or points west, like towards Syracuse or whatever, or Buffalo. That could happen. Some of them probably aren't Bruins fans. They might be Montreal or Sabre fans. But most Bills fans have a lot in common with New Englanders. We're blue collar. We like our football teams. We don't have a big college football team to root for. We live in the cold, right? We understand. We vacation in the same places, like Florida and the Gulf Coast. All right. We enjoy the same things most of the year. We deal with snow, we deal with ice, we have short summers. Bills fans, although we're rivals in the AFC East, you kind of have to respect them. They were a doormat forever. In fact, when the Patriots were a doormat in the early 90s, it was the Bills who were going to Super Bowls. Now, granted, they didn't win any of them. We don't have to remind them of that. But it was the Bills who were then a doormat for much of the early 20th century or 21st century, while the Patriots were dominating. I think Brady lost to them 3 times in his 22-year career or something like that. The Bills, we sat on them for 2 decades. And then we passed the torch. And the Bills have done well. They proved me wrong this year. They had a better year than I thought. Josh Allen is not obnoxious. He's not annoying. He doesn't yell at the sidelines. In fact, at the press conferences, he's very humble. He's not your prototypical diva quarterback he's not that Patriots fans tend to hate. He's not even like one of the Mannings. He's not really that hateable, I have to admit. So, Pats fans, we've got a lot in common with the Bills fans, whether we want to agree with it or not. We don't jump off cars into tables, and we don't light ourselves on fire at tailgates normally. We'll leave that to those guys out there in Buffalo. But we have a lot in common with Bills fans. And more importantly, we need the Bills to beat the Chiefs to end any of that discussion that I was alluding to that I might have to have on this program in the coming weeks and months. All right, so that's my spiel on the Bills. All right, so if you're a Pats fan, you're rooting Bills this week, it's not a discussion. Secondly, the Commanders. I told you in my last episode with Diesel about sports hate. I'm not for any team in Pennsylvania that's an NFL team, whether it's the Steelers or the Eagles. The Eagles beat us in the Super Bowl 52. Eagle fans, there tends to be a lot of them that creep into New England somehow, which is weird. So I'm no on the Eagles. As a result, Commanders, let's go for it. All right, good young quarterback. Don't be jealous that we didn't draft Jane Daniels because I think Jane Daniels walked into a good situation in Washington. Dan Quinn um, had been a head coach before and whatnot, and I think it was a little more solid for him. So don't be jealous of Jane Daniels. We have our guy, but look, Cliff Kingsbury, former Patriot, that franchise was they've been as bad as the Patriots were bad since 1992, except they didn't have a 20-year dynasty in the middle. Right? This is the first time they've really been relevant on a national NFL stage since the early 90s. And that's a proud franchise. Think about some of the players they've had over the course of, Joe Theismann, I believe. Um, uh, John Riggins. I believe they had the first African American quarterback to win a Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, whose name is escaping me. I could be wrong there. Um, Here I am talking about the history of the Washington, football situation without actually knowing what I'm talking about. But I think you understand. The Commanders have and Maryland is a good, I mean, it's not DC, even though they're the Commanders. They play in Maryland. They're not the Ravens, right? So that's good. Give it to them. They're division rivals with the Giants, the Eagles, and the Cowboys. Do Patriot fans like any of those fan bases? No. Do we like the Cowboys? No. Do Patriot fans like the Giants? Absolutely not. And do we like the Eagles? No. The latter two have beat us in Super Bowls in my lifetime. So, yeah, I'm good on the Washington Commanders because if they win, It means the rest of that division, filled with generally fan bases that the Patriots don't jive well with, tend to get along, or will do well for us. So that's my spiel. If you're Patriot fans, you're wondering who to root for this weekend, it's got to be Bills Commanders. I think that's who America's rooting for what it's worth. You either um, die a hero or live long enough to be a villain, or excuse me, live long enough to be a villain. It wasn't that long ago where the Chiefs were playing us in an NFC AFC title game, and we won, and America's worst nightmare was back. But then since then, it's been all Chiefs in the AFC. So, make of that what you want. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that, win, lose, or draw. All right, that's going to be it for this episode of Home Field Advantage. I appreciate you tuning in. If you know what happened in these games, perhaps what I just said was moot, but at least we can sit around the fire and join the trust tree together. If you haven't subscribed, please do so on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on socials at Homefield Pod, where I occasionally put out some content there. We will be back next week to talk about what happened, maybe do an early Super Bowl preview, maybe talk some more baseball, hockey, basketball, whatever else happens in between. But until then, my name is Will Highland, and this has been Home Field Advantage.